The warm-up requires that you sort of use your imagination. It's not something that I've necessarily taught you yet. It should also be sort of common sense. So apparently you don't mess with South Korea. Sorry, with North Korea. I don't know if you all saw the Sony hacking thing.
That wasn't who? Was it?
Apparently, many people are convinced it was the North Korea hack of Sony data centers. They got like 30 or 40 gigabytes of data off like a number of drives. So recently there have been like web release, pirated pre-release films. But more interesting, the contract negotiations of a number of executives. So now there's all this infighting at Sony because people are like, you make more than me, and then they're all like crazy. And they can't email each other, and they lost all their calendars. So they can't figure out if they have meetings planned, like they're not showing up at meetings. Because Sony was making a movie that had a spoof about assassinating.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Barely eat.
Well, okay.
That's all they do.
I kind of love North Korea. I mean, that's a horrible thing to say. It's like the most oppressive, like, vile nation on the
They
planet.
can hack themselves with food now.
They're
They
still
can hack
whack.
themselves with food now.
Seriously, North Korea is what would happen if people who had no idea ran the country. Go for it, you can do it. Okay. Yesterday we did some of this. You'll tell me how far I got, please. And you'll need your notes because we're going to add a bunch of stuff to it.
We didn't do it. We didn't do it. Our 5, I mean our 6, 2. Oh, this one.
Number 45, 3 stars, this thing. Did I tell you the different names of the stages?
Yeah.
Okay. Remember that you can describe the stage like development, or you can describe the country like a developing country. Did I ask you about biology and human geography yesterday?
Yeah.
And some of you said yes, in biology it was 3 stages, but in human geography it was 4. Did we talk about that?
No.
Here's a funny thing. Some people describe this as a 3-stage process, others as a 4-stage process. We're all talking about the same thing. It's just important that you understand, because like if the College Board asks you what happens in the 3rd stage, you got to know if they mean this 3rd stage or that 3rd stage. So check it out. Please look up. In the economics world, This is often said to be a 3-stage transition, because in the economics world, please look up, you're either a crappy economy, a fully modern economy, or everything in the middle. Remember I told you some people used to say third world, second world, and first world? Did we talk about that? And I told you those are not actually accurate terms to use, right? It's just a... Okay, 3 stages. Like the first, second, and third world, you could say developed, developing, and undeveloped economies. But if you take human geography, political science, talk to people that work in international development, from the social and cultural side, this part, early development, is very, very different from this part, later development. So most people, including me, teach this as a 4-stage process. We break up the development part into early and late. So we split the 2 into 2 and 3. Everybody got this? Poor nations start like this. Stage 1 is for a less developed nation. You'll know you're in a less developed nation because people have a lot of babies and there's a lot of people dying. And there's not a lot of money going around. The least developed nations have a very characteristic age structure. Please look up. The least developed nations have, please look up, it's obvious if you see it, short lives and low survivorship. So, watch me. You get a ton of 0 to 5-year-olds, but very few of them make it to 10, and very few of those make it to 15. So you have, please look up, a really in-cut age structure. Low infant survivorship. Also, the peak of that pyramid might be at the 50s. Low life expectancy. See how that pyramid is short and kind of skinny, emaciated? That's the third world. That's a less developed nation. That is pre-development. That's a crappy country to live in. There's a very specific sequence for the green line. Please look up. When you're growing the economy from a poor country to a wealthy country, you don't start with cell phone towers and a high-speed rail system. You start with the obvious stuff. The food, the water, and the basic medical care. And as soon as you do that, please look up, death rates plummet because it's very easy to keep people from dying in a poor country. Nobody wants to die. And humans are pretty rugged. It doesn't take much to keep you from starving to death. You can sprinkle a little fish food on a starving person, they'll be fine. A starving person can eat rotting food, they can eat roadkill, whatever. Humans are actually like pretty good at keeping alive. All it takes is the cheapest investment, the most basic economic growth. Food, water, and basic medicine, and death rates fall right away. It always comes first. Because death is really easy to fix. That's the second stage. So if you look at the age structure, with food, water, and basic medical care, more of those babies survive. You get from this to that. Because you get better survivorship of those infants and longer life expectancy for those adults. the pyramid gets taller and fatter in teenagers. Yeah.
Do you think that it's a cycle, like once a country is developed, could it ever become undeveloped again if the death rates increase?
I will talk about that. Now, Homeboy wanted to ask about the worst case scenario, but I want to talk about the best case scenario first. If you're lucky, and just so you know, I put all those question marks right there, right? You see all those question marks? That's the crux. That's like, how's it going to go from here? It could go two different ways. I drew the best case scenario on the board. Please look up. You keep growing that economy. You leverage that growing population. Does everybody know why population is growing here?
Birth rates are higher than death rates.
Right, because you've got a lot of birth and very few deaths, so there's population growing. Understand that? 5% birth, 1% death, 4% growth rate. Right? Can we talk about that? Birth rate, death rate? Yeah? So watch. If you get lucky, you do like South Korea, like Singapore, like Taiwan, and you get all those extra people into education, into jobs, you offer a diversified workforce, you get all those women educated and working and voting and having a place in society. And if you can leverage extra humans into bigger economy, you win. Because look up. If you can leverage those extra humans into female empowerment, infrastructure, modern education, get some law and order and medical access. Toyota wants to put a factory there. Sony wants to make laptops there. And all of a sudden people go, nah, I'm not going to keep having 1,000 babies and staying home. I'm going to change my culture. This is tough. It's very difficult to lower birth rates. Just so you know, there's no guarantee that things go like this, and some countries have failed. But if you get lucky, those extra humans can make a bigger economy that is modern, and that will solve, remember 1 through 5 yesterday, where poor countries have all those extra babies? We can fix that. Just do the opposite of 1 to 5. Female empowerment, medical access. You postpone the age of first childbearing by having a better education. You don't need a labor effect because everybody's in a modernized educational system. Check that out. Now all of a sudden, if you can lower your birth rates, that'll level off your population. You get back to a stationary population. And your economy keeps growing. Welcome to the modern world. These are the rich countries. You've gone from a place where nobody wants to be to a country like ours. Notice, you don't start by building docks and high-speed trains and colleges and police stations and hospitals back here. There's a very distinct difference, please look up, between early economic development and later economic development. Those are very separate processes. One of them is just keeping people alive. The other one is changing the culture. That part's easy, that part's tough. But if you can give people alternatives to starting a family at 14, you change the culture And you'll start to get an age structure that looks like that. Long lives, decreasing birth rates, and stabilizing population. Looking into the future, well, you can probably keep your economy growing quite a bit. Taxation kind of picks up, government starts to do more stuff. And eventually you get countries that start to look sort of like a pickle. Little curvatures along the edges, but fairly stable populations with very high survivorship all the way to very old age. Remember I told you that was the best case scenario? Anybody have any questions about the best case scenario? Because I'm about to mess things up. Anybody want to ask me about the best case scenario? This is a successful transition. Yeah?
So what's happening in late development? I can't really see.
Female empowerment, basic infrastructure, modernized education, law and order, and medical access. Yeah?
So the right of the early developing pyramid.
This is better survivorship.
Seems like taxation would be earlier in the stage of development because then it gives them more money to do that. Why does that come after?
Yeah, I meant to say this is the part where you start to get a struggle between taxation and government. In the United States, we've kind of gone to a deregulatory climate. Where now we're like, whoa, just let the economy run free. Only way to make more money is to deregulate it. Just let the horses run. Okay, students. Let's do the worst case scenario. Because not all countries do this. We have examples. Haiti, Bangladesh, it's looking like Somalia. There are countries where this didn't really work well. Because remember I told you the question mark is right here, this is the crux moment. What happens if this population grows faster than economy? What happens if you can't keep up with your population growth? It's called the race between the stork and the plow. What happens if the stork wins? If your population grows faster than your food production?
You don't have enough food to support the population, so your death rates increase?
That's right. Everybody hear what he said? What if you don't have enough food for all those extra people and your death rates come back up? Yeah.
Then you just have extra people.
That's right. You go from being a small, crappy country to being a big, crappy country. That's called, please look up, the demographic trap. It's a stalled transition, an incomplete transition. Oh, food's usually like a basic part of the economy, so they're basically tied together. Yeah. Like if your dollars per person aren't enough to support them. See, sometimes your population gets away from you, and so your red line comes back up. It goes like this. So you go like this. Because you went like this. Right? Money per person is not enough to keep up the population, so death rate comes back up.
Are there any countries that have done this so far?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would argue that Argentina has done this. It's not quite as extreme. Argentina probably has these down here now, but the green line seems to have done that in Argentina. Almost undeniably, Bangladesh has done this. Bangladesh had like a pretty successful export economy for about 15, 20 years, and then natural disasters wrecked their economy, and all of a sudden they just had like all these extra people that they were trying to incorporate into the economy. They all show up at the cities and they can't eat, and it's just like, yeah.
Is it because like the individual people have all their money, or is it just because they have money about all their money?
It's a great question. I think in some parts of Central Africa, it might be because of corruption. So in a few Central African countries, CAR, the Central African Republic, Chad, and I think Angola, the money did this, and it also went like into like 3 people's pockets. And so the death rate did that, even though the money was going up. Yeah. I'm not really an expert on all those details. There's people who could give you much better information on this. I just sort of trying to see what I can figure out from Google News. Just so you know, kids, there's some people who talk about a 5th stage, which is either more rounds of development or inevitable changes and natural disasters. This part is pretty clearly progressive, like it's one, then the other, then the other, then the other. 5th stage could be a number of other outcomes. You don't need to know those other possible stages for the AP test in May. But
And then 4th stage is like taxation.
versus smaller government. There's this question of like, do we want to keep growing the economy by putting more economy into more public services? Or do we eventually shrink our government? So like the United States seems to have chosen very clearly smaller government, while most of Scandinavia has chosen very clearly more taxation. Anybody want to ask me anything about this? Last call. Then take out your movie questions. We're going to skip to number 11, however far you are. And start the other movie of our unit. I haven't decided yet. It depends on our timing. I think we did 1 or 2 of those, by the way. But Gabby got 9?
I got 9.
I just got 8.
I got 7. Yes, we
You go, you're the worst. I'm not sure if we will finish the other movie or not. I really wanted to, but as long as you saw like the 3 different age structures, like did you see the age ravaged population age structure? Yeah, it goes like that.
Are places like India and China like really sketched out by AIDS? Like potentially.
I think everybody's sketched out by age,
yeah,
bro.
but I mean like where it's like some of the places in Africa are like completely destroyed by it. Like if that happened, like higher possibility of that happening in India than it is in like here.
You know, I don't know about that. Like, I think there may be cultural differences. Man, epidemiology is fascinating, and I'm really into it. I just don't understand our global relationship with AIDS right now. Like, I think most countries would say we're on the downhill side of the AIDS epidemic. Like today, if you get tested and treated, you can pretty much live a normal future. And a lot of countries have fairly modernized medical access in many areas. So, like, the scary part about India is it is both less developed and most developed in different regions. It's got more than half its population living on the left of that, on the right of that, and less than half the population living on the right of that. I don't know, man. I don't know. Yeah.
What's affluence?
Affluence means wealth. And everybody has to know that. Please look at number 11. Affluence means wealth. You'll need that at the start of this film.
Around the world in Japan, the population is careening in the opposite direction of India's. 300 children once studied here in the elementary school of Oguchi.
This is the first movie.
But once this lone fifth
crap.
grader graduates, no new students will fill his place
Might be, Doug.
because of his...
I was like, it's the same sound.
Yeah, okay. It has the same roots as the other one.
It was true. What I said.
Ah!
So wait,
Aha!
question for number 10.
Aha!
Or no, sorry.
Another stereotypic China thing.
Firecrackers.
We used to worry that population, too many people, would destroy the environment. Now we understand that there's something even worse. Affluence. China is the world's biggest country, and as it becomes more and more affluent, it will overtake the United States to become the world's worst polluter.
China uses more steel than the United States. China consumes far more grain than the United States. China, was once a billion poor people, but China is no longer a poor country.
China may soon be the world's largest economy, with a middle class of 300 million people. All consumers reaching for the good life. Shopping, buying, and even driving in record numbers. For many, it's the ultimate dream. But unless China cleans up its act, the dream could become an environmental nightmare. With a poisoned atmosphere, a world of dying forests, and disappearing wildlife, flooded and baked by the searing heat of global warming. China is at a crossroads, and decisions made here will affect everyone on the planet.
As the most populous country in the world, the future of China's environment will play a big role in determining the future of the world environment.
Can this Asian giant pull back from the brink before it's too late? World in the balance. China revs up. Right now on Nova.
Major funding for Nova is provided by the Park Foundation, dedicated to education and quality television.
Science. It's given us...
God, I'm the worst teacher.
Spring mic.
BT Dubs, this movie was made in 2005 or 2006. After this movie was made, China grew even faster than expected for about 5 or 6 years. And since then, the last 2 or 3 has really kind of stagnated. So most of the projections made in this movie accelerated and then flattened off and backed out.
Along the rocky coast in Washington state, a steady wind blows in from across the Pacific.
Can you please take this and other ones in that blue bag and put them under the lid inside the chicken coop on the corking plum?
Every month, Dan Jaffe comes to check the quality of the air in this remote place near the northwesternmost corner of the continental U.S.
We started the station to try to understand what's the quality of the air that's blowing into the United States. It used to be the air that comes in and then we add our own local pollutants to it.
The results were surprising. He and his team expected pristine ocean winds. But the filters revealed a witch's brew of industrial poisons. A single canister like this could contain sulfur and mercury in varying concentrations, even killers like PCBs and DDT.
Most of the time the concentration of these pollutants is fairly low, but once in a while we get these large pulses of pollution that can get transported all the way across the ocean.
The findings didn't seem to make sense. Air quality has been steadily improving over the last few decades. So where was the stuff in these filters coming from? To find out, Jaffe built a flying laboratory, an airplane loaded with sensitive instruments, able to sniff the prevailing winds in search of chemical clues. After dozens of flights over the ocean, Dan and his team constructed a detailed computer model that decisively fingered the culprit. China. From 3,000 miles away, its pollution was reaching West Coast cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, cities that had already spent billions cleaning up their own air. But there's another problem that the U.S. and China share. In America, our love affair with the automobile has helped make the U.S. the world's biggest emitter of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas that's produced when anything burns. Many scientists believe that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is causing the Earth to become overheated with dangerous and unpredictable storms. And now, China is following in America's footsteps. By the year 2030, China could match the U.S. in carbon emissions. If so, the two countries will contribute more to global warming than all other nations combined.
The United States has set the standard for high living, high energy use. We're one of the most consumptive countries in the world. And if the rest of the world emulates us, the global atmosphere is going to suffer. The world is going to suffer.
China is exporting air pollution and carbon emissions. But we export our lifestyle. And China is one of our best customers. A winter morning in Beijing. The air is thick with what looks like fog, but it's not fog.
The
air in Beijing has been getting worse. It's mostly comprised of smoke, not fog. Urban haze is different than fog, which has water vapor, while this pollution doesn't.
It's no secret where this smog is coming from. Even at 7:30 in the morning, the streets are already jammed with automobiles. 10 years ago, bicycles ruled these roads. But today, they're being forced aside. And that's just one change. Over the course of just a few short decades, the entire city has been utterly transformed into a modern megalopolis. Home to over 13 million people. And other Chinese cities have grown just as dramatically. In the last 2 decades, more than 100 million people have moved from the countryside into urban centers, making this the largest migration in human history. Among the recent arrivals are 39-year-old Xi Zhenong, his wife Shirley Hong, and their 4-year-old daughter Xixi. The family had been living near Xi Zhenong's provincial hometown in southwestern China. But a year ago, they decided to relocate to Beijing. They came in search of independence and opportunity, and to secure their young daughter's future. Their gamble seems to be paying off. They've just bought their first apartment, and they're living a material life that would have been out of reach even a decade ago. Not only do they have cash in their pockets, but they also have plenty of places to spend it. Shopping malls like this one are springing up all over China. Here, everything a consumer could possibly want is for sale. From the latest in personal grooming, to the newest kitchen gadgets.
Rising affluence does presume that people want more and more things, and it's a conveyor belt. It doesn't stop at any finite point. It used to be that the Chinese had what they call the 5 big things they all wanted. You know, it was a radio, a sewing machine, and a bicycle. If you got those 5 big things, you know, you were considered at the top of the food chain. But now there's no limit to it. You know, after you get the car, then you want the house and the TV and the satellite dish and then to travel, and, you know, it goes on and on and on.
The world has never seen a country get so rich so fast. According to the Chinese government, the economy has grown at the red-hot rate of 8% every year for more than 20 years. Average incomes have quadrupled, and energy consumption has grown even faster. China has huge reserves of coal. Coal provides 70% of the energy used to generate electricity and to forge steel for construction and manufacturing. Over the years, industries increased their output to meet demand, but without putting pollution controls in their smokestacks. Every day, when Xi Zhenong and Shirley Hong take Xixi to school, they expose themselves and her to Beijing's toxic air. According to the UN, China is home to 7 of the world's 10 most polluted cities. And respiratory disease has become a leading killer, claiming lives at 10 times the rate found in the United States. Even on what looks like a clear day, the air contains particulate dust, sulfur, lead, carbon monoxide, and other poisons. Right now, that's the price of living in China's most economically advanced cities.
I worry about my own child growing up in this city. All she can see are gray skyscrapers under the gray sky. Sometimes I think that I don't belong here. But I'm living here because I really think it is best for my family.
Xi Jinping is old enough to remember his country's recent past, when the nation's economy was in ruins. As recently as the 1970s, China was suffering the effects of one of the cruelest political experiments in history. Chairman Mao Zedong had tried and failed to industrialize the countryside in an effort called the Great Leap Forward. He ordered millions of peasants to stop farming. He instead set them to work forging steel in primitive furnaces. But it led to disaster. A widespread famine that claimed more than 30 million lives.
One of the things that Chairman Mao was supposed to do in the Communist Revolution was to equalize opportunity and quality of life for Chinese people. And by the end of the Cultural Revolution, China was as poor and impoverished as perhaps it had ever been.
Did they just talk about the population and one-child thing?
No.
Not yet.
Then, in 1979, things began to change. A new pragmatic leader named Deng Xiaoping came to power. Deng needed to find a way to feed 1 billion people. He decided to rein in population growth, no matter what the cost. He imposed a draconian new policy called the one-child rule. Under the plan, most Chinese families were restricted to a single child. The policy outraged human rights groups as stories of forced abortions and sterilization began to leak out.
We got to talk about that a little bit because it was really bad and kind of bad and not really that bad. I mean, any amount of forced sterilization would be really bad, right? But a few details about the one-child rule. First of all, it's done. That was like a period in time, and it's over. Be very careful about that. A lot of people are under the mistaken impression that China still has mandatory family size, and they don't. Second, it was not interpreted the same everywhere in the country. China's very big. And during this time, it was like a really strong government, and some people were trying to be like, yo, we're really good at this. Look at me. I'm really jumping through all the hoops. Love me. And other people were like, yo, this government blows. We're just going to lie and cheat. And so every possible extreme is a part of China during this period. There were like really horrific parts where some people were totally inhuman and disgusting and gnarly. There were other parts of China where people would be like, oh, you had a few kids, whatever, we won't tell the government, it's cool, we're just not going to give them a name or whatever. And like, there was like a really varying degree of enforcement. And so the atrocity factor is not 0, it's just not 100. Yeah?
What was the name of the leader that imposed that rule?
Ping, I think?
Deng Xiaoping. Yeah, wasn't it the Xiaoping?
What's that?
Wasn't it like, what was it? Deng Xiaoping?
Or no, Mao Zedong was the one who imposed it.
That was the one with the seal.
Oh, so then it was Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah.
And so I think his last name would be Deng in that case, not Ping. Because they go last name first, right? I'm sorry that I don't know better. Separate issue. A lot of people, after the one-child thing, if they got a girl, they'd be like, well, I don't want the girl, so if I can bail on her, focus my energies on the boy. So, correct. Because of the one-child thing, a lot of people killed the girls. So the funny thing about the demographic born during the one-child period is there's a lot more boys. Mysteriously, a lot of girls just left the age structure. If you could only have one, God forbid it would be the girl that you got to pay to get married off. Yeah.
Has that like rebounded, or is there still way more boys in China than girls?
You missed your chance. But yeah, there were a lot more boys. It has rebounded.
But the leadership was determined to head off both a human and a political disaster.
If the population gets to be too large, there will be a famine. And if you look at Chinese history, often when there's been a famine, there's been a revolution, and the regime in power gets overthrown. It's a well-learned lesson in China. They've done the experiment many times. So this race between the stork and the plow, as it's sometimes called, can you produce enough food to feed the new children?
You hear that? Race between the stork and the plow? Race between the stork and the plow. Can you produce enough food to keep the growing population fed? A lot of you are still focusing on that gender imbalance. Let's move on.
So China has really actually slowed its population growth rather dramatically. I mean, there are lots of people in China, but the population is not growing that fast.
Population control was a controversial first step towards the goal of turning China into a modern nation. Deng's next step sent a shockwave around the world. He set out to dismantle the communist economic system, abandoning the revolutionary ideals that had brought him to power. The Communist Party of China announced a surprising new policy. To get rich is glorious.
In the early 80s, you could just see the streets slowly come alive with little shops and private entrepreneurs out there. And then by the mid-80s, you began to see people actually renting shops from state-owned enterprises. And then they would rent the whole enterprise. And slowly you got this foliation of all of these private business people.
But the economic forces the party had unleashed were about to lead the country into an environmental nightmare. A 20-year binge of industrial development without any pollution controls.
During the last 2 decades, we were monomaniacal in our pursuit of development. That twisted policy put growth ahead of all else and caused us to neglect many other problems like infrastructure, energy policy, and the environment.
Today, 25 years after Deng's reforms began, China's economy is still growing faster than any other on the planet. But despite its leap into the 21st century, the country is still largely powered by a 19th century fuel. Every day, small factories like this one produce millions of coal cylinders for use in home cooking and heating stoves. The process has hardly changed for over a century. Crushed coal and water combine to make a cake-like batter. An antiquated press turns the rough mixture into circular bricks. After drying, they emerge at the other end of the line. When an order comes in, a waiting messenger loads up his trike and heads out to make a delivery. He'll ride miles through the crowded city streets to reach his customer. Most people in China use coal to heat their homes. China has begun to import natural gas and oil, and the largest buildings in Beijing have been retrofitted to use cleaner fuels. Today's customer, Mr. Wen, a retired school teacher, prefers coal because it's cheap. Just 2 loads like this one will heat his 3-room house for the entire winter for around $50. But there's a problem with this cheap source of energy. Coal is notoriously dirty. Burning it releases sulfurous smoke filled with poisonous chemicals. As China has become more affluent, the need for coal is greater than ever. This is Beijing's newest coal-fired power plant. It's only a few years old, but engineers are already adding a fifth turbine to meet ever-rising demand. In 1980, China burned roughly 400 million tons of coal, about half the yearly total of the United States. But today, China uses more than 3 times as much, 1.3 billion tons. That's nearly 4 times more than India, the world's second most populous country, and 25% more than the United States, the world's biggest energy consumer. This plant operates at about 40% efficiency, on par with most conventional power plants in the U.S. Until recently, China said it couldn't afford to build these cleaner facilities. Now, they can't afford not to.
The estimates of the Chinese themselves are that they're losing something in the range of 6% of their GDP to the public health costs from pollution, lost productivity, costs of healthcare, and so on associated.
I don't know if you all caught that. I wish I'd made that a study goal, but I wasn't smart enough. 6% of the Chinese gross domestic product is lost to the impact of air pollution. Think about what that means. In the size of their economy, 6%. 6% of their economy, their GDP because of air pollution. Like in the United States, we lose something like 7 or 8% because of obesity. You know, people can't go to work if they're not feeling right. If they're not going to work, they're not making stuff, selling stuff, buying stuff, spending stuff, and we can't be taxing all that. So environmental quality does have an economic impact. It's called lost productivity.
With pollution. They already know they have to fix it.
The cost of confronting the country's legacy of pollution can be very high. This is the entrance to Capital Steel, China's third largest producer. Steel is an essential commodity. Without it, the Chinese economy would grind to a halt. Like electricity, steel production depends on coal. For decades, Capital Steel was one of the biggest polluters in Beijing, until recently. In a rare and surprising move, the government ordered the company to install costly new pollution controls and to close an aging furnace, reducing steel output by 20%.
What's standing behind us now is the abandoned former #1 steel factory. At the beginning of this year, we followed the government's order to close it down because the facilities were relatively backward. It was very difficult to make this transition.
Across China, the government has begun to close down factories that are too polluting, putting many people out of work. Although it's hard to predict, these closings may be a sign that China is moving into a new phase in its development, following a well-known path called the Kuznets curve. In the 1950s, economist Simon Kuznets was charting the relationship between industrialization and the environment. He noticed that when countries first industrialize, pollution levels rise. As the process of modernization continues, levels eventually peak and begin to decline. He theorized that rising affluence plays a role. A more well-to-do population demands a cleaner environment. When a country reaches a critical level of affluence, pollution levels drop.
That's clearly what happened in our country. And it seems to be a fairly global concept. It should make sense to you. If you're poor as F, you'll do whatever you have to do to feed your family and suffer whatever environmental issues. And you know, once you can afford it, yeah, sure. you'll subject yourself to clean air standards and more expensive machinery to keep your house warm because, you know, like, you can afford it, you might as well be clean. And by the way, this is sure the case in the United States today. In California, we have like the best air quality because we can afford it. That does cost our economy. That's why California can afford it. We are a humongous and successful economy. In a lot of the poor states, they would never accept the kind of taxes that we need in this state to keep our air clean and stuff. Play that again? No.
England, the United States, Germany, and Japan all follow this pattern. Most observers believe that China will eventually reduce industrial pollution. But at the same time, China is grappling with another problem, which may prove much more difficult to solve. In China's largest cities, the worst air pollution is no longer from smokestacks. It's from the tailpipes of cars. Just a few years ago, these crowded streets were nearly deserted. In 1995, the number of cars in all of China stood at a mere 2 million. Today, the number is 20 million and rising. Beijing has seen the most rapid growth of all, with 400,000 new cars rolling onto the city's roads in 2003 alone.
The car is the beating heart of this whole sort of consumer culture that China has become enamored of. And it's really one of the highest expressions of the individual's right to go where you want, when you want, with whom you want. The car is the mother of all symbols and the highest stage of symbolic success.
Today, it's increasingly hard to find a middle-class Chinese consumer who doesn't own or want to own a car. Xi Zhinan and Shirley Han moved to Beijing to start their own business. He's a photographer and she's a writer. Together they produce films about wildlife in China.
所以就很近嘛，我离它的距离就是那么2米多嘛，就2米左右，是都没有2米1米多。
These two are more environmentally conscious than most Chinese, but even they are talking about buying a car. Shirley Han is the driving force behind the decision, so it's her job to shop for the family car.
你好，我们去哪里？
那个燕京汽车交易市场。
啊，好的。
Please remember we stopped at 25.5 minutes. The lady was car shopping. Before you leave, I have 2 questions for you. I'm sorry. How many juniors in MAD take human geography, AP human geography? Are taking it this year? Separate questions. I'm sorry, I got to ask a couple more. Please don't leave yet. How many take microeconomics or Latin? MAD juniors. 1 or 2 human geography. Anybody know who? Which juniors in MAD?